In one of the very first churches I worked with, the elders would have their meetings at different restaurants in town. And I wasn't going to those meetings at that time, but they were going to a particular restaurant, and they ran into this young lady who was interested in knowing more about Christianity. And so they asked me to give her a call and see if she would have a Bible study with me. So I did, and she did, and we got together and started having Bible studies together. She was physically just a beautiful young woman, and had a good attitude towards life and towards God, and we studied, and a few weeks later, she wanted to become a Christian. She wanted to be baptized. So that was wonderful. We got in my car to go over to the church building, and on our way to the church building, she said, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe that there's really a hell? That there's really a hell that's filled with fire and brimstone? And I said, well, the Bible describes a place like that. It talks about hell. It talks about there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then she paused for a moment, and she started unbuttoning her sleeve, and then she pulled it back. And it revealed one of the most horrendous scars you've ever seen. Her entire arm was just a scar. And she said, when I was a little girl, I was in a house fire. And my whole body's pretty well covered like that. And I just don't ever want to have that kind of experience ever again. When you think about that, the scars were there, but the wounds were healed. The pain wasn't there any longer. I'm sure she had horrendous pain, but it was gone. But the memories were still there, and the scars were telling us a story. And in our text today, we are learning about how scars can tell a story. And so we're going to be in John, the 20th chapter, beginning in verse 24, where it begins, But Thomas. But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. So we're a week later now, and Thomas has showed up. He wasn't there the first time Jesus met with them. And so the other disciples were saying to him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see in his hands the imprint of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. After 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, reach here your finger and see my hands, and reach here your hand and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believing. Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. Therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. There is something very amazing here, something extremely strange. The resurrected body of Jesus had scars. Did you ever think about that? The resurrected body of Jesus had scars. The thing that killed him, the evidence was still there. He still had scars. Now, his resurrected body had changed in other ways. He was able to come into a room where the doors were locked and the windows were shut, and he was able to come into their midst. How he does that, I don't know. He was able at times to not be recognized by those who knew him. But one thing that had not changed was his hands and his feet and his side still had scars. The resurrection didn't remove the scars. And scars tell a story. That's the thing about scars. Scars tell a story. There's a story behind every scar. And what Jesus' scars were telling us is, first of all, that he was human. He was human. What happened to him on Friday was very real. The crucifixion was very real. It happened to him. One of the earliest known heresies to Christianity is called Doceticism. Doceticism from the Latin, which means to seem. And Docetics would say that Jesus didn't really come in the flesh. He just appeared to come. He just seemed to come in the flesh. He didn't really die because God cannot die. Pretty good argument, isn't it? God cannot die. God cannot suffer. And since Jesus is God, he cannot suffer and he cannot die. He only seemed to. He only appeared to. And by the way, Islam today teaches the same thing. Islam says that Jesus could not have suffered and he could not have died. Reminds us of what Paul said. The cross is a stumbling block to, it is foolishness to Gentiles and a stumbling block to the Jews. And it's still that way today. And so this Doceticism just said, well, he just appeared to. He didn't really. But the scars tell us a different story. They tell us, yes, he really did. He felt the pain of those nails. We know the story, don't we? We don't have to go through the story about what happened to him on that Friday. But we know that he felt that pain. We have a great high priest who is not unsympathetic to our infirmities. He knows what we're going through. He feels what we're going through. He understands the pain that we sometimes feel in this life. And not only that, but we realize that not all scars are visible. Some of them are on the inside. I mean, Jesus felt pain that we don't see. He was tempted in all things as we are. He struggled just like you and I do. He was betrayed by one of his best friends. He was stripped naked and he was beaten and he was mocked. And one of the most terrible things for me to realize is that he was stripped naked and nailed to a cross and his mother was standing there. I can't think of anything in my life what I wouldn't want. I didn't want anything to happen to me in front of my mom because moms always feel pain, it seems like, more than we do. And I can't imagine what that must have been like for Jesus to know his mom was there. And there was a sword piercing her heart as well. Not all scars are visible, but the scars say this. Jesus' scars say this. It says, this is real. I really went through this. One of the things that's happening with Thomas that really helps us out is Jesus really died. You know, sometimes people say, well, he didn't really die. He just appeared to be resurrected because he didn't die. We know now from Thomas, yeah, he died. How did Thomas know? He stood there and watched. He knew that there were nails in his hands. He knew that there was a spear thrust into his side. He died. It was real. And so Jesus had scars. And why does he show us his scars? Because he knows that we need to see things sometimes. His resurrection is the guarantee of our resurrection. And sometimes we just have to see things. Thomas. We have a name for Thomas. We call Thomas Doubting Thomas. We kind of rub it in. Look at him. He is such a doubter. Do you realize the Bible never calls him Doubting Thomas? It never says that. We just throw that on there like it's a biblical thing. Doubting Thomas. And we kind of rub it in. But we all need evidence. And all the others had gotten the evidence. In verse 20, it says that he showed them his hands and his side. And it says, and then they rejoiced. It was after they'd seen this, then they rejoiced. Then they knew that this was all real. They had already seen the scars. We all need evidence. We sometimes talk about blind faith. God never demands blind faith. The Bible doesn't talk about blind faith. Faith is built upon evidence of things not seen. Now, faith is not what we see. It's an evidence of things not seen. There's so many things we don't know. We've never seen. I've never seen heaven, but I believe in a place called heaven because I believe in Jesus. And so we all need this evidence. In fact, I think it's unacceptable to not question. It's unacceptable to be gullible. It's unacceptable to park your brains at the door and then come in here. It's unacceptable for you to coast through your faith. Sometimes we need to ask questions. Remember, the Bereans were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they checked the scriptures daily to see whether those things were so. What the Bereans were saying is, prove it. Show us this is true. We need the evidence. We want to see something. There's that desire to know. And sometimes it's doubt that precedes faith. I know people that doubt from time to time. Don't we all doubt from time to time? And they feel so guilty, as if they've committed some great sin. But sometimes doubt leads to a deep-rooted faith. Oswald Chambers said, doubt is not always a sign that a man is wrong. It may be a sign that he is thinking. He's thinking. And sometimes our doubt makes us think, and we want to know, and we want to have the evidence, and we want to see more. I remember when I was a teen, and maybe you've gone through the same thing when I was a teenager. And some people go through this when they're teens and when they're young people. And they start having questions, and they start having doubts, and they want to know, is this real? Does this really make sense? I no longer want to just accept my faith because that's what my parents had, or that's what my friends had, or that's what I've been taught all my life. I want to know for sure. And that doubt led to a faith that was personal and it was very real. And so I don't call Thomas a doubter. Thomas is a smart thinking guy. He wants to have evidence. He wants to have some reasonable faith. Doubts, this desire to know. That's what doubt does. It says, I have a desire to know more. Now, it can also be, and I need to mention this, it can also be a rationalization for sin. And unfortunately, I see this quite a bit today. It's just a rationalization for sin. Some guy, or it might be a husband, or it might be a wife, and they start finding fault with one another, and they start slandering one another, and they start telling everybody how bad they are, and they're preparing, they're leading up to a divorce, and they want a lifestyle that is not one that we see reflected in Scripture. And so they begin to say things like, well, the Bible is just a bunch of myths. How do we know that there's really a God? How do we know the Bible is real? How do we know that Jesus is real? And they begin to throw these things out. I don't believe the Bible, and I don't interpret it the way you do anyway. And unfortunately, so many are not really interested in the truth. They're interested in living life the way they want to live it. That'd be contrary to Scripture. And so, yeah, doubt can be good because it can lead us to a deep-seated faith, but it can also be a rationalization for sin, just to do whatever I want. Now, John tells us that his entire reason for writing these things is so that we'll believe. He says, I want to give you the evidence. I want to show you the reason why you should believe. You don't have to put your brain in neutral to be a Christian. You need to engage with the facts. It's not a lack of evidence here. There's plenty of evidence. Doubt is real, and it should lead us to greater things and not lead us to an excuse. It should motivate us to dig deeper. And so here we have Thomas. Thomas says, I just want to know more. I'm not willing to have these doubts. I saw him die. How has anybody ever seen anybody come back to life? No, we've never seen that. They hadn't either. The only one I've known is Jesus had done this. And so he wants to know. And he sees Jesus' hands. He sees his side. He feels his hands. He feels his side. And he comes and says, my Lord and my God. That's what he came to believe, that Jesus is his Lord and he is God. And Jesus says this, blessed is he who believes and has not seen. You realize that we're all blessed here? We're blessed because we have believed but not seen. And it doesn't mean that we haven't seen the evidence. We just not have sight. We just haven't actually seen it, but we've seen plenty of the evidence, haven't we? In fact, did Thomas really need to see it? I don't think he actually needed to see Jesus. I mean, he knew that God kept his promises. I mean, that's what Jesus showed. God always keeps his promises. All those prophecies from years and years before were being kept by God. God always keeps his promises. And Jesus had predicted his death, burial, and resurrection. The Old Testament had predicted it. And I think Thomas could have come to the conclusion, well, that just makes sense because God's always faithful. In fact, he had seen so much in his life with Jesus. He had seen prostitutes being rescued. He had seen tax collectors who were changed. He had seen lepers healed and the dead raised and people's lives being transformed. When they said Jesus is alive, we have seen the risen Lord, I would almost expect Thomas to say, well, you know, that just makes sense. That just makes sense. Yeah, of course. He didn't need to actually see it because it makes sense. We don't have to see it because it just makes sense. When we've seen God work in our lives, I hope you've seen God work in your lives. I can think of all the times I've seen God work in my life. I think back when I was a senior in high school, my father died. Probably the greatest impactful thing in my life was my father's death when I was so young, and it came as such a shock. And God gave me hope through that. And when I had marital problems and we were struggling as a young couple, God saw us through that. And when our baby died, God saw us through that. And, you know, he saw me through my stroke. He saw me through my heart attack. And, I mean, these just scratched the surface. And don't you remember all the times that God was with you? He was with you when you had cancer and when you were in the hospital and when you lost your job or your spouse left or your kids were on drugs. He was always with you. He's seen you through all those things. And I trust that the open wounds of my life right now, the things that I'm going through will one day be a scar. That will just be something more that God has seen me through. God has seen us through so much. You know, why is it every time we go through something new, we want to feel the scars again? You know, God has been there in the past. He'll be there in the future because God keeps his promises. It just makes sense that he'll see us through whatever life has before us. And you know, we have scars. We have scars. You know, some of the scars, we try to cover up our scars. I have a scar on my baby finger that is probably the oldest scar I've had in my life. I don't know why it's still there. I had it when I was a kid. It's embarrassing. I don't even want to tell you about it because I was doing something stupid. Have you ever done something stupid and end up with a scar? And then sometimes you get scars because you're a victim of something. My wife has a scar on her nose. That is where they cut cancer from her. I'm sure she's glad that I've explained that to everybody because she covers it up really good because we cover up our scars usually. We're a little bit embarrassed by our scars. And some, you know, the movie Jaws, there's a scene in the movie Jaws that's really great. And they begin talking about their scars. The one guy pulls out his parcel and he has all these teeth missing. He says, this is what happened. And then he pulls up his pant leg. This is where I was bitten by a bull shark. You see, every scar has a story. And the other guy, pulls up his pant leg. I was bit by a moray eel. And they begin to share their scars. He pulls back his sleeve and there's a scar. And he says, that's where they removed a tattoo from my arm. And they all begin to guess what the tattoo was that he had removed. And then after they share all these scars they have, the character played by Richard Dreyfuss, he starts unbuttoning his shirt and he points right here. He says, right here. And they said, oh, did you have open heart surgery? No, this is a scar that tops all the rest. He says, Mary Ellen Moffat broke my heart. Some scars aren't external. Some scars are internal. We've had those internal scars. And, you know, we usually hide those scars. Everybody has a scar. There was the recruit that wasn't in the army, and the guy was writing down things. He says, do you have any scars? He says, no, I don't have any. He says, son, everybody has scars. You don't have a scar, I'll take you out in the back and we'll show you some. And all of a sudden he says, oh, I got one or two scars. Because we all have one or two scars when you think about it. And I think sometimes, like Jesus, we need to let other people see our scars. I remember a friend some years ago going through an experience, and he was hurting. He was in pain. He had a gaping wound in his life, and he's full of pain, and there was no hope. He just thought he would rather die than go through what he was going through. And he didn't know what to do. And I pulled back my sleeve and showed him my scar. I'd gone through the same thing you have. Here's how it works. Here's how I went through it. And here's how I got through it. I showed him the scar. It's been healed, but the memory's still there, and the scar tells a story. It tells the same story that you're going through now, and though you have this gaping wound now, and now it hurts now, God can see you through this, and eventually it'll become a scar. It'll become just another thing in your life that you've gone through, that God has put you through. The scars tell a story. It tells us of our old life. Some of you in your old life, you created so many scars, and that old self was done away with. That those old wounds were healed. You overcame addiction, our bitterness, our grief, our immorality, you name it. And sometimes we show our scars with a little bit of braggadocity. We start to brag about our scars. We almost glory in our shame. We can't do it that way, but with humility, to be able to say to somebody, yeah, I've gone through that too. I mean, this is the background to so many support groups, isn't it? To say, hey, we're all experiencing the same thing, and God has seen me through it, and He'll see you through it too. Scars tell a story. And the story that it tells me is this: you can trust God. You can trust God. Scars tell a story that He arose. We have the great physician. He's now here. And whatever wound you have, whatever gaping pain you have, He can heal all that. He can put it in the past. I'm so thankful that Jesus had scars and was able to share those with us, and we could do the same as well. Praise God. Let's stand and sing together.